Total Warfare here. In this video we are going to break down what unit stats in Total War Rome 2 really mean and uncover the secrets behind key battle mechanics. By the end of this, you'll understand how melee attack and defense work, the interaction between weapon damage and armor, the hidden role shields play, how fatigue and morale impact your units in battle, and more. Ready? Let's dive in! First up, let's talk about melee attack and melee defense, two of the most crucial stats in close combat. Melee attack is your unit's chance to land a hit on the enemy. The formula here is simple. Take the base 40% chance and the unit's melee attack, subtract the enemy's melee defense, and you've got your chance to hit. The odds of landing a blow range from a minimum of 15% to a maximum of 75%. For example, if your Spartan hoplites face archers, they will hit 64% of the time. But when facing another hoplite, that chance drops to 19%. So, more melee attack is usually better, especially when facing units with strong defenses. To hit a hoplite with 75% certainty, you would need a whopping 92 melee attack. Now, let's flip the script and talk about melee defense. This stat caps more easily and hits diminishing returns around 70. So, units with high melee defense will rarely be hit, only 15% of the time, even by the best enemies. For most mid-tier or elite units, a high melee defense of around 70 is enough to hold the line. For example, Spartan hoplites with 65 melee defense attacked by Oathsworn will only get hit 23% of the time. Raising their melee defense by just 8 points brings them down to the 15% cap, which means they can hold out longer, even against one of the best offensive units in the game. Next, we dive into weapon damage and armor piercing. Weapon damage comes in two forms: base damage and armor piercing damage. Every time your unit hits, the base damage is reduced by the enemy's armor. Here's how it works. The game rolls a random number between 0 and the enemy's armor value. This roll determines how much base damage is reduced. Armor piercing damage always goes through, making it crucial against heavily armored enemies. For example, if two hoplites are fighting, each hit does 6 armor piercing damage, but their 20 base damage is reduced by their high armor. So on average, only 2.4 base damage gets through, and most of the damage comes from the armor piercing hits. The takeaway? Armor piercing damage is essential in prolonged battles, especially against heavily armored units. Let's compare two units. Sacred Band from Carthage has 29 weapon damage and 5 armor piercing, while Royal Spartans have 30 weapon damage and 8 armor piercing. Both units have 105 armor, meaning nearly all of their base damage gets negated. However, since the Spartans deal more armor piercing damage, they will grind down the Sacred Band over time. Now let's look at how armor impacts the damage against a typical sword unit like Hastati, Principes or Legionaries with 30 base damage and 5 armor piercing. Iberian swordsmen with 15 armor take 27 damage on average. Celtic warriors with 45 armor take only 15 damage on average, and hoplites with their 80 armor take just 10 damage on average. Notice that increasing armor from 15 to 45 reduces the damage received almost by half, but going from 45 to 80 only reduces it by another third, and beyond that the returns are minimal. Elite units with armor values like 105 only reduce damage by 1 point more, so while armor is critical, there are diminishing returns the more you stack it. Let's now talk about shields. Shields play a key role in both melee defense and armor, but only when the attack comes from the front or left side. If an enemy attacks from the rear or right flank, the shield is completely useless. This is why positioning is so critical. For example, if you attack a Spartan hoplite from behind, you almost double the damage you deal. Shields also offer protection against missiles, blocking arrows, stones and javelins. Some units come with incredible shields. For instance, Germanic spear wall and slingers block 60% of incoming shots. Romans and hoplites are solid too, with a 50% block chance. But pikemen and cavalry have pretty weak shields with only a 25% block chance. And don't expect Thracian nobles to block arrows. While they have shields, those shields only boost armor, not block projectiles. Here is a quick breakdown of shields and their block chances. Best shields, 60% chance. Spear wall, Germanic slingers and Germanic youths. Strong shields, 55% block chance. Round shield swordsmen, wooden as spears and swordmasters. Good shields, 50% block chance. Roman melee infantry and all hoplites. Average shields, 40% block chance. Most barbarian and Hellenic swordsmen. Weak shields, 25% block chance. Pikemen and most cavalry. Ever wondered why even low-tier spear units seem to crush cavalry? That's due to the bonus versus large stat, which boosts melee attack and weapon damage against elephants, horses and camels. For example, a basic levy freeman might seem weak, but against cavalry, their bonus versus large makes them much more effective than higher tier swordsmen. Even just having a couple of cheap spearmen on the flanks can turn the tide of a cavalry charge. Bonus versus infantry works the same way. This bonus targets infantry units and significantly improves your unit's damage output against them. Next up, charge bonus. Charge bonus gives a temporary boost to melee attack and weapon damage when a unit charges. It lasts for several seconds and gradually fades, but during this time, your unit will be significantly more effective. This can be a game changer. For example, in a hoplite versus hoplite fight, their base hit chance is 17%. However, when one side charges, that chance jumps to 38% and their damage per second increases 2.5 times. Key tips: always charge where possible, especially with shock cavalry. Keep your cavalry engaged until the charge bonus wears off. A good way to tell is when their kill count stops rising, but their own losses start increasing. Don't charge infantry into charging cavalry. Cavalry typically have a much higher charge bonus and deal heavy impact damage. Instead, brace your infantry to boost defense against the charge and minimize losses. Now let's talk about fatigue. As your units perform actions, running, fighting, shooting, climbing hills or scaling walls, they accumulate fatigue. The heavier the unit, the faster it tires. Here's how fatigue affects your troops. Fatigue recovers only when a unit is idle, not fighting or walking. Though walking restores stamina much more slowly than standing still. Fighting while exhausted is extremely ineffective. Your units deal far less damage and take much longer to kill enemies. In long battles, especially when defending choke points, it's better to pull a unit back and let it rest before sending it back into action. A few tips for managing fatigue. When attacking, always walk towards the enemy to conserve stamina. Only charge when you're close, especially if you're under fire. When defending, position your units on a hill. This forces the enemy to run uphill, which tires them out much faster before they even reach you. And a bonus tip: weather has a huge impact on fatigue. Units recover much slower in rain or snow. Finally, let's discuss health and morale. Health is straightforward, the more the better. But morale is what really keeps your units in the fight. Once morale hits zero, the unit will flee, no matter how much health it has left. Morale acts like a multiplier for all other stats. It's essential for keeping your troops fighting. That's why early game units that look good on paper often turn out to be traps. They might have decent stats, but with low morale, they won't hold the line for long. Instead, it's better to invest in units with solid base morale. Ideally, your frontline troops should have at least 50 morale. 70 is even better, which is the standard for elite troops. There are plenty of ways to boost morale before a battle even starts. You can improve it through general promotions, army traditions, certain buildings, tech tree upgrades, and agents either attached to an army or deployed in the province. Units also gain morale with experience, and since this is a fixed increase rather than a percentage, it's especially useful for lower tier units with weak base morale. Once the battle begins, morale constantly shifts depending on what's happening. It goes up when the general is nearby, when a unit is winning its fight, or when it has local numerical superiority. But it drops if the unit is losing, outnumbered, flanked, or attacked from behind. It also takes a hit under missile fire, especially if the enemy is using flaming or whistling arrows, which lower morale even more. Some units like elephants and certain barbarian warriors even have abilities that directly intimidate enemies and cause morale shocks. Because units in Rome 2 tend to have high morale, especially on higher difficulties, the best way to break enemy forces isn't just brute force. Instead, you want to stack morale shocks to make them collapse faster. For example, if you rear charge an enemy unit while also hitting them with flaming arrows, that's usually enough to make them rout, even if they still have plenty of men left. Ever wondered why, during a long battle, the last few enemy units often break at the same time? That's because of the mechanic called army losses. For every 20% of an army lost or routed, the remaining units suffer a morale penalty, with the biggest drop happening at 80% losses. This is also why fighting 3 enemy stacks often isn't that much harder than fighting just 2. By the time the 3rd army enters the battlefield, their morale has already taken a massive hit. Sometimes they will rout without even losing a single man. So the key to victory isn't just dealing damage, it's breaking enemy morale as efficiently as possible while keeping yours high.